Rapport family? We're back with another great edition of Building Rapport. I'm your guy, Mike G. I'm here with my guy, Ike Jones. We have a very special guest today. The voice of the Auburn Tigers, Andy Burcham, joins us to talk a little bit about Auburn Sports and his time covering. Andy, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Mike. Good to be with you and Isaac today, and good to talk some Auburn athletics.
Andy, you've been covering Auburn athletics since 1988. So you've been around a while. You've seen some things. You've seen the conference go to a conference championship game in football. You've been around undefeated seasons, a number of different coaches. Tell us a little bit what it's like being part of the culture for so many decades at Auburn and how that's had an effect on you as a person.
I moved to Auburn in September of 1988. I had spent exactly one day in Alabama prior to that day, and it was just to find an apartment to move here, and started to work immediately in the Auburn area, and began 31 years of covering Auburn women's basketball at Auburn. And the first 2 years of that were Final Four years, national championship runner-up years with Joe Ciampi. And then that was 88. In 1990, I went to work for the Auburn Network as the pre- and post-game host in the locker room with Coach Dye on those Auburn football teams, and then every coach since then. And then in 1995, moved over, and in addition to those other roles, started to work with the legendary Rod Bramblet. And for 25 years, he and I called Auburn baseball. So it's been a long road for me. I grew up in Southern Illinois, about 50 miles outside St. Louis, in a small farming community, and always wanted to be in this business. Growing up, listening to the Cardinals with Harry Carey and Jack Buck, two of my all-time favorite announcers, and Dan Kelly, who called the St. Louis Blues. They're all Hall of Famers. Bob Costas got his start in radio at KMOX in St. Louis, so I listened to the first Bob Costas ball games that he called. So I knew this is something I wanted to do, and I really knew it from a very young age, but had no idea it would ever take me to the South, would ever take me to Auburn, Alabama. And as a result, I've lived in the Auburn-Opelika area longer than I've lived anywhere else. And while Southern Illinois is where my family still lives, and it's my hometown, my home is Auburn. So I've been incredibly fortunate, incredibly blessed to be a part of this university and in this role, and now as the voice of the Auburn Tigers. And I thank the Lord Jesus for it each and every day.
Well, listen, you certainly have been a major part of my experience with Auburn. You know, I started down there in 99, so I don't remember very much outside of hearing your voice calling a lot of games, because I would listen to the radio, all that kind of things. But question for you in regards, you said you always kind of wanted to do it, but how did you get your start in radio? Like, what was the thing that kind of promoted you into that space?
My spark in radio was really listening to the Cardinals and Harry Carey and Jack Buck. And I'll date myself here, but in '67, when the Cardinals beat Boston in 7 games to win the World Series, my father brought home an actual album of Cardinal highlights for that season. And as a 6-year-old, I listened to that all the time. And at that point, that's when I decided I want to be a radio play-by-play man. At that time, I wanted to be the Cardinals guy. But it's all I ever studied in community college and then at Indiana State. And it's all I've done. I didn't even have a major or a minor in college. I know that's not very smart, but that was the case. And I got my start. I was going to a community college, living at home still, right after high school. And every small community there has its own radio station. And they carry the high school football and basketball games in Southern Illinois. And the man that was the play-by-play voice for the Nashville High School Hornets knew that I wanted to get into the business. So he allowed me to be the third man in the booth for football those 2 years. And I had no idea what I was doing other than talking. And then that second year of community college, that same radio station had sold a package of small high school basketball games, small high schools in Southern Illinois. And you got to remember, in Southern Illinois, basketball is what football is to the South from a high school perspective. Basketball is enormous. And they had sold this package They called it the Quad County Game of the Week. And they were these very small high schools. And we would go to different high schools. Well, the man that was supposed to do the play-by-play left the radio station, kind of left them in a lurch. And so one night we were driving back from a Nashville high school football game, and Brad Meyer said, "Hey, listen, we've got an opening to do these basketball games. You think you could do it? Can you do some play-by-play?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely, I can do it." Well, I'd never done it before. So at that point, I started going to the Nashville high school basketball practices and sat up at the very top of the bleachers and started broadcasting, so to speak, those practices. And that's how I got my start. So my first play-by-play was small high school basketball in Southern Illinois. And then I had experience by the time I got to Indiana State and did college games there for Indiana State, baseball, basketball, women's basketball, football. They were the student station there was allowed to do all the home games. And that's how it started for me. And then 3 days after I graduated from college, I was helping my father move into a new office in the same town that high school that I'd worked for before. And they called, this was before cell phones. So they called my mom. My mom called my dad at the office and they said, "Hey, we've got an opening in Bloomington, Illinois. Are you interested?" Well, I was 3 days out of college. I didn't have a job. I said, "I'm absolutely interested." They said, "Well, we'd like for you to interview for the job." And I said, "I'll be happy to do it tomorrow." I said, I'm helping my dad move. I'm in blue jeans and a t-shirt. They said, "We don't care." And so that radio station was about 100 yards up the road from my dad's office. So I walked up the road to that station and did my first and one of my first job interviews in a t-shirt and blue jeans and got the job. And I've been in radio ever since.
Andy, I want to talk about being ready for the moment as a play-by-play guy. So, as of this recording, Auburn baseball is preparing to host a regional, and this is a surging team right now. They got it together toward the end of the season, but there have been some pretty exciting moments happening late in Auburn baseball games. And I always wonder, and I think fans wonder, how, as play-by-play guys, you guys prepare yourself for that big call when it comes. Iconic moments in Auburn sports over the last 2 decades. You are in a very, what I would say, just fortunate position to be able to be the guy making that call, to be the guy whose voice is always associated with that one moment in Auburn history. Talk about what it's like preparing for that moment when it comes. Do you come up with stuff in the off time? Do you envision the home run in the bottom of the 9th with 2 outs and the count full? Like, how do you prepare for the moment when it comes?
I'm told as a kid that I announced our wiffle ball games. So, or our pickup basketball games or whatever. So I've been doing it for a long time. I don't know the specific answer for that, Mike, other than you just have to be prepared for the moment. I don't script out big moments like that. There are probably some that do it very well. I've never been that person. It's always what comes to me at that time. Now, I may think of some things that go into that call. Listen, Rod Bramblet never could have envisioned the kick 6.
Right.
He just called it, and it became iconic. Jim Fife never envisioned Tillman. It just came to him, and it became iconic. And there are so many more from those 2 gentlemen to mention. But, for example, last year's final out at the Oregon State Super Regional, it just came to me to talk about where Auburn had gone from Auburn to Corvallis to Omaha. And the moment kind of takes over at that point, for me anyway. But I think if you listen to a lot of the iconic calls, Russ Hodges calling the shot heard round the world, the Bobby Thompson home run with the New York Giants, I don't think he had any of that scripted out. That's exactly what happened. That's how he called it. Or classic calls from Vin Scully or whomever. They happen. Those announcers were prepared for that moment, and the moment then took over. And then I think that dictates how you call that at that point.
Yeah. So just in the mode of like the calls, right? Like what do you feel like is the toughest sport that you've had to call? Like, are there some of them that just come more naturally to you to like be able to pick up on? Have you just always been a fan of just all sports, and so it all comes pretty naturally? Or there's some sports that are a little bit tougher for you to do the play-by-play for?
With regard to the play-by-play, I've done basketball longer than anything, so I'm comfortable with basketball. I've done it since 1980, for example. Baseball was the sport that I played growing up. I probably understand that sport better, and it's a different pace in a baseball game. There's more free time. It's a slower pace game. There's more time for interaction with the person that's doing the commentary with you. Football is the biggest challenge for me because I've done it less. I haven't done it as much as I've done basketball and baseball. It's such an enormous event, and it's the profile. It's the premier sport,
right,
in the South and in the Southeastern Conference. And so I'm always trying to learn from other broadcasters in the league. All right, how do you prep? What goes into your calls? You know, what goes into your spotting board, for example? And I'll show you mine.
Okay, because I was about to say,
Yeah.
You're about to hit me to something here with the spotting board.
Yeah,
right?
this is what I do every week, and it takes me basically from Thursday to Thursday to put this together. That's Auburn's offense, and well, this is a day, so that's what the A-Day board looked like right there. Right. But it's a 2, sometimes 3, maybe even a 4 deep that I'm putting together. So football is the biggest challenge for me.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy it. I enjoy the crew that I get to do the games with. It's a great joy for me to be with Jason Campbell and Ronnie Brown, and this year we'll add Will Herring to our group on the sidelines, and Brad Law and Paul Ellen and Jacob Hillman and Gene Dulaney, Patrick Tisdale. These are friends of mine. These men are friends of mine in the booth and outside the booth. And we've got a text chain that we keep going year round. And some of it has to do with football. Some of it has to do with family. Some of it is just a funny quote that we've heard. And so I liken that part of the job to what it must be like for these big time athletes that played football together, and they still have that text chain with those guys that played ball. And maybe they haven't played a competitive game in 20 years.
Right.
But that camaraderie that grows with those men and women, doesn't matter, is remarkable. And we have that, especially with our football crew. It's the biggest crew that we have. We travel together. Friday night dinners on the road are important, and not just for the meal, which is important, no question about it, but just that camaraderie and that opportunity to be together with these men. And I look forward to that very much.
Andy, you've had the opportunity now to be a part of the program as the voice of the Auburn Tigers through a couple of coaching searches. You guys do a weekly program called Tiger Talk, where you get to sit down and talk with coaches about everything that's happening with the program. Talk about that experience, what it's like being able to get to know the head coach at Auburn football. Obviously, that's one of the highest profile positions of employment in the state. And these guys affect a lot for the community, for the university, for the student athletes. You know, what has it been like being able to get to know the coaches as they've come through Auburn? And what have you learned, about these guys, in that experience, every cycle of coach that comes through?
Yeah. The first coach that I dealt with, the first football coach that I dealt with, was the legendary Pat Dye. And I don't mind telling you that I was intimidated by Coach Dye, especially early when I was doing his pregame and postgame interviews. I knew of his reputation. I wanted to do a good job. And what I learned about interviewing Coach Dye was that Coach Dye was the star of the interview. That and what I mean by that is that other person is the star of the interview.
Right.
Regardless if it's Coach Dye or Coach Pearl or Coach Freeze or Coach Thompson or Coach Champy or on my everyday radio job before, if it was someone that was coming in to talk about some fundraiser in town. I learned that most from Coach Dye. That's the most important part of the interview. It doesn't mean that I don't need to be prepared for the interview and make sure that the interview goes well, but that other person is the reason that people are listening, not me, that other person. I learned that from Coach Dye. And I got a chance to be with Coach Dye after he was out of the coaching realm, and I hosted an outdoor show that he did for a long, long time and got to know the man a little bit. I never try to interject my friendship with a coach until it happens, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
With these coaches, I let it happen. If they want to confide in me, and then that's terrific. I'm there for them. If they want to keep me away a little bit, I understand that. And I think you find that more and more in this day and age. And if it comes, it comes. If that trust is there, terrific. I will earn that trust from that coach, regardless of who that coach is, no matter what the job is at Auburn University.
I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit here, Andy. Who's your favorite coach? Who's your favorite coach that you sat down with?
Well, I'll be honest with you. There are a couple, and I was with these coaches for a long time and developed friendships with both men. One was Joe Champy, who was the legendary women's basketball coach, Hall of Famer, led Auburn to 3 straight Final Fours, 3 straight championship games, numerous SEC titles. And he was the first coach that I was with at Auburn. And it took a little while for Joe to trust me. But that's one. And there's a man that I enjoy interviewing every time, and the interview is never long enough when we sit down, and that's Hal Baird, the legendary and Hall of Fame Auburn baseball coach. Not only was he successful as a baseball coach at Auburn, but perhaps the most intelligent coach in any sport at any level that I've ever been around, and is a great conversationalist. When Rod was alive and we were traveling 25 years around the Southeastern Conference, most of the time in somebody's or a rental SUV or van or something like that, we loved it when Coach Baird would ride with us on a road trip, because it became just one story after another from Coach Baird, and we just sat back and listened to the man. And so now when we do interviews together, I have that background. Rod thought so much of Hal Baird, for example, that he named his middle son, or he named his son Joshua after Coach Baird, Joshua Baird Bramlett. He named after Coach Baird. So that's how much of an effect that Hal Baird had on Rod Bramblet. And it's the same for me. Those would be the two coaches that I've spent the time with, that I've developed a friendship with, that I enjoy talking with, being with. So those would be 1 and 1A on the list for me.
All right. So you mentioned this earlier, and I want to get back and just kind of, again, putting you on the spot a little bit in regards to this. Don't really do records anymore, maybe like a playlist on Spotify. But if there was a Spotify playlist of the best calls from Andy Burcham, and they ask you to come commission that, what do you feel like your top maybe 1 or 2 calls would be on that playlist?
I would have to say one, and I wasn't the play-by-play man on this one. I was doing the color.
Okay.
It was Rod Bramblet. It was 1997, and Auburn baseball fans know exactly where I'm going with this. David Ross, now who's the manager of the Chicago Cubs, was a sophomore catcher at Auburn. He was the backup catcher at Auburn. Auburn was playing at Florida State. He grew up in Tallahassee. His high school baseball field was just beyond the left field wall at that time. There in Tallahassee, it's not there any longer. And Auburn's number 1 catcher, Casey Dunn, who's now the head coach at UAB, was injured in the regional, and David Ross was Auburn's catcher the rest of the season. And he came up in the bottom of the 9th in the Saturday game against Florida State. Both teams were undefeated in the tournament. Auburn had trailed the entire day, trailed by 5 going into the bottom of the 9th. Auburn was the home team, and that's a big key in the story. And got a 2-run homer from Jamie Kirsch to cut the lead. Auburn trailed by 4 going in. Auburn cut the lead to 2 on a 2-run homer to right by Jamie Kirsch. And Ross is at the plate in the bottom of the 9th against a really good closer for Florida State. And he gets to 2 strikes and he swings. Florida State's already coming out of the dugout. This is a really good Florida State team, by the way.
Mm.
And the catcher dropped the foul tip, just dropped out of his glove. Auburn gets ball 2 to Ross, and then on a 2-2 pitch, the pitcher leaves a slider up, and Ross hits the ball out of the ballpark. It's the legend of David Ross at Auburn. Auburn wins that game, wins the next day with Tim Hudson on the mound, and goes to the World Series. And that call is just so electric. And it was probably the first call of many by Rod that he became known for. So that's one of them, Ike. My two probably are the very first game that I called as the voice of the Auburn Tigers, and that was Auburn, Oregon in Arlington, Texas. The Bo Nix to Seth Williams pass in the last 20 seconds to win that game against Oregon. And then last year, I've already referenced it, Auburn's run to the World Series and going to Oregon State. And Auburn had to stay an hour and a half away from Corvallis because it was graduation at Oregon State. They had not secured a hotel for Auburn. So Auburn's driving back and forth this beautiful drive in the Willamette Valley. And Oregon State had never lost a super regional at home. This is a team that has won 3 national championships. And Auburn wins the first day, loses the second game 4-3, gets the lead. It's 4-3 into the 7th inning with the tying run at third and the winning run at second with 1 out. And Auburn brings Blake Burkhalter into the game, who had become Auburn's closer out of Dothan, Alabama. He gets the last 2 outs of the 7th inning, sets down Oregon State in order in the 8th, and goes to the 9th to the top of their order. And it's a 4-3 game. The trip to the World Series is on the line. It is the last game of the Super Regional. So everybody is watching Auburn, Oregon State. And Burkhalter gets a strikeout to the leadoff man on the first pitch, gets a line drive to left. Bryson Ware, who's blossomed into a fabulous player this year.
Incredible.
Just set the Auburn single season record for home runs. All he was a year ago was a defensive replacement.
Right.
And he was in the game in left field, and he comes in and makes a catch going to his knees on a knuckleball right to him. So there's 2 quickly out. In the 9th, he gets to a 3-2 count and throws a pitch down in a way that if the batter takes it, it's probably ball 4.
Right.
But he swings and misses. And just the emotion of that entire season and winning on the road when very few people thought Auburn had a chance to win, and watching that team rush to the mound and dogpile in Corvallis, it gives me chills still thinking back to that. So those are probably my top 2 calls. And I hadn't even gone to basketball yet, for goodness sake. Getting to call what Bruce Pearl has done at Auburn.
Right.
I apologize for that. There are several of those, but those are the 2 right now, Isaac, that and Mike that come to my mind.
Is there a line between being the voice of the program and a fan in these moments, right? Like where you're injecting so much of your emotion into the call, but also, like you said, you've grown relationships and you follow the program and you're part of the community. And when people hear the name Andy Burcham, they think about all these iconic moments that have happened over the last few years in Auburn sports, right? Like, is there a line for you between being the voice of the program and kind of being a fan of what you're watching and what you're calling?
I don't know about the line. I do feel that my position and Rod's position and Jim's before that, and Paul Ellen and Gary Sanders and Buddy Rutledge, I mean, these are legendary men in my business. I feel you're a voice not only for Auburn football or basketball, but you're a voice of Auburn, the Auburn family. And I know what it's like to benefit from that Auburn family and know how important that Auburn family is to me and to my wife, who is a 2-time Auburn graduate herself and has had season tickets for football since the 70s at Auburn. I mean, listen, we're there for the fans, right?
Right.
I mean, that's who we're talking to.
Yeah.
And we may be still talking to, someone a parent of a Penn player this weekend on Friday, because that's the way they can listen to the game if they choose. They can listen to us. And I don't want to ever take anything away from anybody in any uniform, but you're going to know who I'm broadcasting for.
Yeah.
And there are some others that try and play it a little more down the middle that are legends in this sport and in this business. You've always known what school I'm calling for, always, and that will never change.
Andy, I did want to talk to you a little bit about our friend and former voice of the program, Rod Bramblet.
Yeah.
Right. And the calls that he's made. Obviously, he was on the Kick Six. He's been on a lot of big calls over the years. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that Rod had on the program, on the community, and on you yourself, right? And I wanted to give you a chance to just kind of honor his memory, in this interview.
Rod and I met, I think we were probably covering an Auburn City Council meeting. We were both worked in local radio, and part of our jobs was news coverage. So we would be at Auburn City Council meetings, and we cover that council meeting, and then we'd walk out to our car and we'd talk life or aspirations in our business, never really dreaming of what our careers would become at this point. And then we got to work together in football. And that's a lot of time in a car or a van. We were always roommates on the road. I joke that my wife tells me that I spent more time in a hotel room with Rod than I did with her. And she's right. That's the case. But we became very close friends. And it was not just the big games, and we loved the games. We loved baseball season. We loved the program with Hal Baird or Steve Renfro or Tom Slater, John Pulowski, Sonny Galloway, and of course now with the incredible job that Butch Thompson has done. So you get to know these men. For the most part, you become friends with these men. So you care. You care about them. You care about the young men that you're covering and that are growing up right in front of your eyes in the program. And as we get ready for this regional, as we're recording this today, we're a couple days away from a regional at home. And for Rod, there was no time of the year that he enjoyed more than the baseball postseason. And I think of Rod a lot because, this is the first time that Auburn's ever hosted back-to-back regionals at home. He only got to call one regional at Plainsman Park, actually two. And Auburn won one of those. The other time Auburn lost and the season was done. But Rod was, he comes from Valley, Alabama. His mother was a school teacher, then became principal. She just recently passed away. So they're reunited. His father worked in the cotton mills when the cotton mills were blowing and going in East Alabama. And so Rod grew up and in the summers he'd work at the cotton mills, and he got a part-time job at the radio station in Valley, and that's what started his career. And, we were talking, I was mentioning with Isaac before that the big calls, they just happen.
Right.
The most important thing about the big call is the play, right?
Right.
You become known because you do a great job with that great play. But without that great play, it's not an iconic moment.
Right.
Now, Rod took it to another level, those iconic moments. The prayer at Jordan Hare or the kick six. The run to the Final Four in 2019 with Auburn basketball. And that's how many people remember Rod. My wife, Jan, and I knew Rod and Paula because they literally just lived up the street from us. And Rod and Jan and Paula became friends because their husbands were in the same business. They were doing the same thing. They would meet for dinner many times when we were out of town. And then the story that I've told, and I think a lot of Auburn people know about it, there was a fall night, a Friday night before an Auburn football game, and many times we would get together and have a meal and rarely talk sports because it was time just to talk about family. And Rod said, he told me we were working in the same, our offices are in Beard East Coliseum, the old basketball arena at Auburn. This is Rod's office that I'm talking to you from today. And he said, listen, I'm going to ask you guys something serious tonight at dinner. And rarely were our dinners together serious. It was lighthearted. There was a lot of laughter. I had no idea what was coming. And we were sitting at an Italian restaurant here in town having a dinner, I think, before a Mississippi State home football game. And he said, listen, we've been talking, and if something should happen to Paula and I, would you guys consider being the guardians of our children?
Wow.
And we're like, well, we knew the answer. I said, Jan and I said, well, we probably need a couple days to really discuss this, but we knew the answer. And Monday morning I walked in, I said, yeah, we'll be there for you. Obviously never dreaming that anything would happen. As we get together today, it's 4 years ago, almost to the day, that the accident occurred. And their daughter, Shelby, who was at Auburn University at the time, was 19 when the tragic accident occurred that took the lives of Rod and Paula, but their son was 15. And as we were driving to the UAB hospital after receiving word about the accident, before we already knew that Paula had passed away, and we didn't know Rod's condition at the time. We started looking at each other like, we made a promise to our friends, and the gravity of that situation really hit us at that point. And we got to the UAB hospital and were notified that Rod had passed away as well. And then it really became the reality that, and Jan and I have never been parents other than a couple rescue dogs. We've never been parents before. And so we're about to bring a 15-year-old into our house, and how will we do? I can remember talking to a friend of mine. I said, I just want to get him to when he turns 19 and he's still alive at this point, Yeah. But Joshua is now 19. He's at Auburn University, living in an apartment off campus, and just finished his first year at Auburn. So
amazing.
That friendship for us was much more than just a working friendship for Rod and I, and it was a close friendship with Rod and Paula and Jan and myself.
Definitely an amazing career that you've had so far. Just kind of in retrospect, as you think back about all of the moments that you've had, like what would be the one thing that you haven't done yet in your career that you would like to be able to do before you decide, you know what, we've had a good one, it's time to hang up the microphone?
In any of the three sports that I call, whether it's football, men's basketball, or baseball, I would like to be there for the championship game. I would like to call that championship game for Auburn, whether it's the national championship in football or at the Final Four in men's basketball. I had a chance to do that twice with women's basketball, or be there on the final day of the College World Series. I'd like to have that moment where I'm calling a national championship for Auburn, because I do. One, listen, it's a thrill.
Yeah.
If you're in this business, you want to have that call. You want to be there. I also know how important it is to Auburn to be in that position, to play for a national championship in football, basketball, and baseball. And I hope it happens in every sport at Auburn, but these are the three sports that I'm calling right now. So I guess before I hang it up at whatever point that is, I would like that opportunity to sit down and put those headsets on and call that championship game for Auburn.
Andy, I just want to take this moment to thank you for the story that you told about Rod. I almost kind of moved to tears listening to what he meant to you, to the community, and for you guys, for you and your wife, for stepping up, right, and being there for him. In terms of the children, and I've always felt that that's what Auburn as a community has been about. So I just want to say thank you for embodying that Auburn spirit, being part of the community, and continuing to be the voice of the Auburn Tigers for what we hope are going to be some incredible moments to come. So thank you for giving us a little bit of your time today to talk about Auburn, what it means to you, and we appreciate you so much.
Mike, Isaac, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate the work that you guys do. I've been watching your videos on YouTube, and I'll continue to do so.
Guys, that's it for another great edition of Building Rapport with our guy, Andy Burcham, the voice of the Auburn Tigers. If you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe. We are the War Rapport on every social media platform. TW Rapport on TikTok. Guys, we're signing off, and as always, War Eagle.
War Eagle.